My mother always preferred my sister. She was the family's golden child. I was seen as the difficult one, the troublemaker. But one day everything changed when I became a millionaire. Suddenly, to my mother, I was the best daughter in the world. But for only one reason: money. Before the story begins, if you like our channel, subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. And now we invite you to enjoy a story with an unexpected ending. For as long as I can remember, my mother had a favorite, my sister, Emily. She was the perfect daughter, the pride of the family, the one who seemed to light up any room she entered. From a young age, Emily charmed everyone with her sweet nature, angelic smile, and above-average intelligence. My mother never hid how proud she was. She made sure to tell all the neighbors, teachers, and friends about the achievements of my golden girl. And me? I was just the other daughter, the one who was always in the background. I remember the first time I noticed the difference in how we were treated. I was 6, Emily was 7. That Christmas, my mother gave us very different gifts. Emily got a beautiful, large, and detailed dollhouse. I got a small doll with no accessories. When I asked why my present was so much smaller, my mother forced a smile and said, "Because Emily behaves well and deserves it." That moment stuck with me. From such a young age, I learned that in my mother's heart there was a hierarchy, and I was at the bottom of it. As the years went by, the gap between us only widened. Emily got perfect grades, and my mother proudly taped her report cards to the fridge like trophies. I worked hard too, but it was never enough. If I brought home an 8, my mother would sigh and say, "Your sister got a 10. Can't you try a little harder?" No matter what I did, it was never enough. There was an unspoken rule in our house. Everything good was for Emily, and everything bad was left for me. If Emily wanted a new dress, my mother took her, shopping for the prettiest one in the store. When I asked for something, the answer was always the same: "Olivia, money doesn't grow on trees." Deep down, it felt like my very existence was a mistake. If something broke in the house, my mother would immediately look at me. "What did you do now?" If Emily and I argued, even if she started it, I was the one who got scolded. "Olivia, why can't you be more like your sister?" I felt like I was living in her shadow. Emily was my mother's masterpiece, and I was just a poorly drawn sketch. The worst part was that Emily knew she was the favorite, and she used it against me. When we were little, she would take my things without asking, and if I complained, she'd run to my mother crying. I didn't even bother defending myself because I already knew what was coming. "Olivia, why do you always have to be so difficult?" Things only got worse during our teenage years. Emily was the perfect daughter, beautiful, well-mannered, studious. I, on the other hand, was the rebel. Or at least that's how my mother saw me. If I came home 2 minutes late, she'd have a meltdown. If Emily went to parties, my mother just smiled and said, "She deserves to have fun. She studies so hard." There was one moment I will never forget. I was 16 and needed a dress for an important school event. My mother refused to buy one, saying it was a waste of money. But just a few days later, when Emily casually mentioned she wanted a new dress for a party, my mother took her to buy the best one in the store. When I confronted her about it, she simply said, "Emily represents our family well." That broke me. That was the moment I realized that, to my mother, I was just a burden, someone she put up with out of obligation. I tried to turn to my father for support, but he never took sides. He would just lower his head and say, "Don't let it get to you, Olivia." But how could I not? How could I ignore it when day after day I was treated like a mistake? The pain of being rejected in my own home slowly made me cold. I stopped trying to please anyone. If I was never going to be good enough, why even try? My mother saw me as the family's troublemaker, and I started to embrace that role. But what she never imagined was that one day I would prove my worth. And it wouldn't be in the way she expected. If Emily was the sun, I was the shadow. At least, that's how my mother saw us. My sister was everything a mother could wish for. Polite, kind, intelligent. She got perfect grades, played the piano, was adored by teachers, and had a bright future ahead of her. When she walked through the neighborhood, people would smile and say, "Mrs. Margaret, your daughter Emily is an angel. You must be so proud of her." And of course, my mother would puff up with pride and reply with a beaming smile, "Oh, my Emily has always been special." But if someone asked about me, her tone would change. She'd sigh, put her hands on her hips, and say in an exhausted voice, "Olivia? Oh, she's difficult. Always has been." Words that hurt more than a slap. The favoritism was obvious. If Emily wanted ballet lessons, my mother would rush to enroll her in the best school. When I showed interest in drawing classes, her response was, "That won't get you anywhere. Stop wasting your time." I grew up hearing that everything Emily did was wonderful and everything I did was a mistake. Once, when I was 15, our school held a writing contest. The theme was, "My Greatest Inspiration." Every student participated, including Emily and me. To everyone's surprise, including my own, I won first place. My teacher praised my writing, saying I had real talent. My name was announced over the school's loudspeaker, and my prize was getting my essay published in the local newspaper. I went home excited, hoping that, for the first time, I'd see pride in my mother's eyes. But when I shared the news, she simply raised an eyebrow and asked, "Did Emily participate?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, but she came in third place." My mother's face fell. "Well, I'm sure your sister did her best. Maybe she was just tired that day." And that was it. No congratulations, no hug, nothing. That night, I overheard my mother comforting Emily. "Sweetheart, you know you're smarter. These competitions can be unfair sometimes." That's when I understood. In my mother's eyes, I could never be better than Emily. The final blow came a year later. Our school was hosting a big dance, and all the girls were excited to pick out their dresses. Emily, of course, had a date with the football team captain and had already chosen a stunning blue gown. I, on the other hand, didn't have a date, but I still wanted to go. I asked my mother to help me buy a simple dress, nothing fancy. She sighed impatiently. "Why, Olivia, you don't even have a date," I insisted, and in the end, she gave in. But she took me to a cheap thrift store and bought me an old, faded dress. "This will do, and don't complain." On the night of, the dance, when Emily saw me dressed, she let out a mocking laugh. "You're really going out like that?" My mother glanced at me and shrugged. "It's not like anyone's going to notice her, Emily." My face burned with shame. At that moment, something inside me broke. I was exhausted, tired of being invisible, tired of being treated like a mistake. Right then and there, I made a decision. I would leave that house, and I would prove to my mother that she was wrong about me. I didn't know how, but I knew that one day she would regret all of this. The night of the dance was the last straw. At that moment, standing there in a ragged dress while my sister looked stunning, I realized I would never be valued in that house. My mother would never see me as someone worthy of love or pride. So, I did the only thing I could. I decided to leave. I was 18, with no certainties except one. I would never again allow myself to be treated as less. Running away seemed like the easy solution, but reality hit hard the moment I found myself alone. I took the little money I had saved and moved to a nearby city. I found a tiny, cheap room to rent, cramped and run down, but it was mine. The first few months were hell. I got a job as a waitress in a 24-hour diner, serving drunk customers in the middle of the night and enduring the impatience of rude bosses. My paycheck barely covered rent and food. There were nights when I went to bed hungry, days when I thought about going back. But what kept me going was the memory of my mother's eyes, the look of disdain, the look of someone who never believed I could become anything. And more than anything, I wanted to prove her wrong. Between shifts at the diner, I started studying entrepreneurship on my own. Books and free online videos became my refuge. I discovered that even without a college degree, I could learn about business, investments, and technology. I spent sleepless nights reading about startups, watching how ordinary people built companies from nothing and changed their lives. That's when the idea hit me. I realized there was a problem no one was solving. Small business owners wanted to sell their products online but didn't know how. What if I created a simple platform to help them? I had no money to invest, so I did what I could. I started working as a freelancer, offering basic digital marketing services. Every penny I earned, I reinvested into my idea. I was rejected dozens of times. People told me I lacked experience, that my idea wasn't worth anything. But I kept going. After a year, my small platform finally launched. And to my surprise, people started using it. Small business owners began increasing their sales, and my business started growing. Then, one day, an investor noticed my project and asked to meet with me. "Your system has potential," he said. "I want to invest." At that moment, my life changed forever. That investment was the push I needed. In less than 3 years, my company grew at an astonishing rate. I went from someone who barely had money for food to the owner of a multi-million-dollar business. The media started talking about me. The young woman who built an empire from nothing. I received awards, was invited to speak at conferences, and suddenly, people wanted to hear my story. But there was still one person who hadn't shown up. My mother. And I knew that, sooner or later, she would. She just needed the right reason. And that reason was money. My life had completely changed. I was no longer the rejected girl, the problematic daughter my mother had always despised. Now I was making headlines. My name appeared on business websites, and my story inspired young entrepreneurs. I had built a digital empire, had employees, and for the first time, I felt like I was the one in control of my destiny. But no matter how hard I tried to bury the past, it came knocking at my door. It all started with an unexpected phone call. My phone rang, and when I answered, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Olivia? Oh my God, my daughter. It's been so long." "My mother?" I was silent for a few seconds, caught off guard. She never called me. In all these years, she had never once tried to reach out. "Hi, Mom," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Sweetheart, I heard about your company. I saw you on TV the other day. How are you?" She tried to sound excited, affectionate, but I knew that tone all too well. It was forced. Fake. "I'm doing well," I said, offering no details. "Oh, I'm so happy. I always knew you were smart." I swallowed hard. Always knew? This was the same woman who spent my entire life telling me I'd never amount to anything. She kept talking as if we were close, asking about my work, my life, pretending to be interested in a way she never had before. But I knew there was a reason behind it, and I was right. After a few minutes of small talk, she finally got to the point. "Olivia, sweetheart, I don't know if you're aware, but things haven't been easy for us. The economy is tough, and your father and I are struggling financially." I already knew where this was going. "Oh? What happened?" I asked, just to see how far she'd take it. "Well, dear, bills are piling up, you know how it is, and the house needs some repairs. And well, I hate to ask, but since you're doing so well now, maybe you could help us out a little." There it was. She hadn't called because she missed me. She hadn't called because she realized how cruel she had been. She called because she wanted money. I swallowed my anger and stayed calm. "You want me to help you financially?" She let out a small laugh, trying to make it sound less like a request. "Oh, honey, I wouldn't put it that way, but look at you. You're a successful businesswoman now. I'm so proud of you." Proud. Where was that pride when I needed it? I could have exploded in that moment. I could have thrown everything she did to me right back in her face. But I knew she wouldn't care. People like my mother don't feel guilt. They only feel need. So I decided to test something. "Of course, Mom, I'd love to help," I said, pretending to be enthusiastic. She let out a relieved sigh. "Oh, sweetheart, I knew you were different from what people thought." Resentment burned inside me, but I stuck to my plan. "But there's one condition," I continued. There was a pause. "Condition?" "Yes. I want to hear you admit that you always treated me worse than Emily, that you always saw me as a mistake, that you never believed in me. The silence was deafening. What? Olivia, I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. You've always known. The only reason you see me now is because I have money. She tried to laugh it off, to deflect. Oh, sweetheart, don't be silly. I've always loved you. You're overreacting. That's fine then. No problem. You don't need my money, right? She went completely silent. The truth was, she would never admit it. And without that confession, she wasn't getting anything from me. I have to go now, Mom. Have a nice day. And just like that, for the first time, I was in control. In the following days, she kept trying to reach me, calling, sending messages, playing the victim. But I didn't care anymore. My victory wasn't just financial. My real victory was realizing that I never needed her approval. The little girl who once begged for love and recognition no longer existed. Now, I was the author of my own story. After that call, something inside me changed. For the first time in my life, I no longer felt like the rejected girl who needed to prove her worth. I felt free. But my mother didn't take my response well. In the days that followed, she persisted. She sent long messages, trying to justify her actions. She called repeatedly, leaving emotional voicemails, trying to convince me that everything she did was for my own good. Olivia, sweetheart, I made mistakes, okay? But you need to understand that being a mother isn't easy. You've always been so stubborn. I just wanted you to be strong. Your sister misses you too. Why can't we just be a family again? She tried everything. One moment she played the victim, the next she tried to manipulate me, and then she used Emily as a bridge to get to me. But I knew her game, and I wasn't playing anymore. Then one day, after weeks of failed attempts, I received a different kind of message. I'm in town. I'd like to see you. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore her, completely. But another part wanted to face her. So, I agreed. We met at an upscale cafe in the city center. When I arrived, there she was, well-dressed, perfectly made up, wearing a smile. But her eyes told the truth. There was no love there, only calculation. She stood up and tried to hug me. My daughter, you look beautiful. The last time my mother had called me beautiful, I was 6 years old. I sat down without responding. She started talking as if we were close, reminiscing about childhood, moments that, for me, were nothing but painful memories. After a few minutes of small talk, she finally got to the point. Look, I know things haven't been easy between us, but we're family, and family helps each other, right? I looked at her without saying a word. I'm not asking for much, sweetheart, just a little help to start fresh. Maybe buy a new house, pay off some debts. You have so much. It wouldn't even make a difference for you. There it was. The real reason for this meeting. I took a deep breath. Then, with all the calm in the world, I asked, Mom, tell me something. If I were still that broke waitress who could barely pay her bills, would you be here right now? Her smile faltered. What do you mean by that? I leaned forward slightly, looking straight into her eyes. If I were bankrupt, struggling, would you still be asking to be a family again? She stammered. Of course, sweetheart. I've always wanted our family to be together. I gave a cold smile. Interesting. Because when I needed a mother, you weren't there. She went pale. Olivia? No, Mom. You always had a favorite daughter, and that's fine. I've accepted it. But don't sit here and pretend you love me now just because I'm a millionaire. For the first time, she had no words, no excuses. If that's all, I need to go. I stood up, grabbing my bag. She reached for my arm, desperate. Wait, Olivia, please. You made your choice back then, Mom. Now I'm making mine. I pulled my arm free, leaving her. There, sitting alone, for the first time without control over me. I walked out of that cafe without looking back. In the months that followed, my mother tried reaching out a few more times, But I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel anything anymore. I moved on. I kept growing, expanding my business, living the life I had always dreamed of. And more importantly, I did it without needing anyone's approval. Because my greatest achievement wasn't the money. It was realizing that I never needed her to be someone. Now I was free,